Greetings, YouTube. A while back, Robert WF42 asked me a couple of gaming-related questions, and that was from my RPG Pondering New GM Advice video. And in this, his first question was how to prevent the game slowing down during the tedium of mass combat resolution. And that can be a tough one. Sometimes you just have big battles. For the GM, I think one of the easiest things to do is have 1, 2, and 3 hit mooks. That means regardless of the amount of damage done to them, a 1-hit mook goes down 1 hit, 2-hit mook goes down with 2 hits, and you get the point. 3-hit mooks go down with 3 hits. Gives you a simple tiered structure, and that counts for everything that isn't a named bad guy or an important bad guy. For example, the bad guy and his animal companion would not be 1, 2, or 3-hit mooks. Or if you want to have more of a you don't have any 3-hit mooks in your game, you make them 1 and 2-hit mooks. These are the poor saps that are just the cannon fodder for the bad guys, and you don't have to track hit points for these things. You just put down, okay, 1-hit mooks. Somebody smacks them with anything, and they go down. They're the ones that get blown away when the late mage throws his brand new shiny fireball that he's never used before. It gives him a sense of power because he knocks 4 guys down. Sure, he knocked 4 guys down. Awesome. You knocked down 4 guys that had the equivalent of 3 hit points apiece. But he doesn't know that. He doesn't have to know that. All he knows is that he cast that big shiny new spell of his and 4 bad guys went down. Other things you can do are find people in the game who aren't necessarily running player characters, say people whose characters are unconscious, or people whose characters are dead or incapacitated, or they're off scene, and have them play some of the NPCs. Give them the mooks to play. So the GM is concentrating on the named important characters, and then his assistant is going to be doing the rest. And if you find yourself in a situation where mass combats are the rule, and that's mean like you're having them every single encounter for whatever reason, maybe you want to have a stand-in GM as an assistant, sort of like a teaching assistant. You have a GM's assistant, and they run a lot of the subroutines that, you know, in a online game would be run by software, but you have someone there helping the GM along. And this could be someone that doesn't normally really want to get into the game on a deep level, or they're just doing a one-shot, you know, they're just stepping in to help out or something. It could be someone's spouse that doesn't want to necessarily dedicate themselves to a full-time character. There could be any number of reasons. There are people that go to LARPs just to play the monsters. You know what I mean? There are people who like to play support roles, and there's no reason that you could not have a support role for a GM as well as having a support role for the party. I mean, lots of people like to play the healers or the mechanics because that's the role they like. Well, that's just a role for the player characters. There's no reason they also couldn't have people who'd like to play a similar position for a GM. I realize it's not a common response. It's not a common solution, but if your game is constantly encountering these large encounters like this, maybe that's an option. Of course, you also might be asking, why are you encountering so many large encounters? Maybe you want to restructure the game so that there are more smaller unit combats. Sort of like the idea of taking the enemy down a little bite at a time instead of trying to take on the enemy in a big, huge chunk. The concept of, you know, 1 bite at a time and you can eat a whale. So maybe the GM wants to restructure their storyline a little so that the player characters are exposed to fewer mass combats than they would normally. But these are suggestions I would use. I like the 1, 2, 3 hit mook solution, and then you just worry about the bigger bad guys as names. Another tactic I've used to some success in the past to give an interesting counter that isn't necessarily huge is to create a mirror of the player characters. Literally use their character sheets to create bad guys. Just file the serial numbers off, switch up just enough so they can't tell at first blush that they're facing their own party, and throw that at them. Obviously, you have to be careful about magic items and things like that because you're tailoring it really well to them, so you don't want to just give them bonanza unless that's a major encounter and you want them that's their major prize right there. So that's an idea. That's what I would suggest as idea, just to ballpark it. Now I'm looking for suggestions from the comments. When you're dealing with large combats, regardless of the system, how do you handle it? What advice can you give to a GM who's facing the daunting task of, okay, I've got 20 friggin' guys I gotta run. Do you know what I mean? And the party's got 5 people in it, so that's 25 characters on that field of combat at one time. I don't want to be overwhelmed, and I don't want to have, people just twiddling their thumbs while I'm taking care of everything that the one-player character is doing. Not to mention the daunting task of figuring out the decision. Sure, low-level mooks are just following orders. But, I mean, the 3-hit mooks and the ones above that, they're going to be making tactical decisions. Dynamic tactical decisions. So that's a lot to put on the shoulders of a GM. So, if anyone has any advice in that regard, it would be most appreciated by me, if not by Robert. And the second question, how to ensure adventures hit that sweet spot of being challenging and fun for the players without being too easy or too hard? And that is another broad, tough question. Because too easy or too hard at what? Say you got a 5-man team. Not everyone in the group does the same thing. So an encounter that emphasizes the skill set of 2 of the characters may be easy for them, but hard for the rest of the player, those characters, because they're not tuned. Their characters are not tuned up for that type of encounter. And then you don't say there's a skill challenge. Okay, you can tailor it to that character, if things are going well for them, but the rest of the party is twiddling their thumbs, or maybe their support, or they're hopelessly out of their depth because they don't have the skill set to pull the things off that dedicated character. Same with this mages or psionics or glitter boys, the real heavy hitters. They all have their pluses and negatives. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. So finding that sweet spot is going to be difficult. It's so dependent on the GM style and on the player style. There is no definitive answer. I cannot just hand you a formula and say, okay, if you put these numbers in this end, you're going to get that result on that end. It isn't going to work that way. It's very much about the dynamic between the GM and the player and their agreement with each other to make sure that everybody's having fun. And if somebody isn't having fun, the GM or the players, you have to figure out why. And if 4 of the players in the group are having a great time and the 5th player isn't, you need to accommodate that person. Now, it's not always going to happen that everybody's going to have fun. Exactly. But if that same person is consistently not having fun, there's something going wrong. And the GM needs to look at their campaign and decide, is this player appropriate? Maybe this guy should have a different kind of character. Or is the GM have a blind spot that isn't providing the kind of challenges that this character is tailored for, that should belong in their world. So maybe the player's got it down pat. The player has created a character that makes perfect sense in the world the GM has created, but the GM themselves has this kind of hole. It's not filling that gap in the way that he or she should. That can happen. We all have our blind spots. We all forget things sometimes. I made a blunder once where I had a major campaign element, big adventure, they get to the reward, and I duplicated a reward I'd give the player characters before. I completely and utterly spaced it. Absolutely flubbed it. It was a horrible letdown. I made it right, but that doesn't matter. I blew the climactic scene of that reward in that adventure. And it was something I've been ashamed of ever since. And I'm not down on myself about it. I'm not becoming depressed, but I failed miserably at that scene. I didn't do what I should have done. I did not express due diligence and make sure that, I was not duplicating something. But sometimes you get so much in your head and you don't remember to write down every single detail as much as you wish you had. And sometimes the people who are keeping the notes aren't necessarily spreading them around. Now it's easier, now that the electronics are very common. This happened in an era when electronics was just becoming a major component of the gaming world, back in the second edition. So everybody makes those flubs. You know what I mean? So finding that sweet spot is hard, because the DM's juggling all those player characters and the world and things, and you got to make sure that communication is flowing. You got to make sure it's a two-way street. And particularly at the end of a good adventure, that's when it's the most difficult to get information to a GM, or a GM receptive to wanting to hear the things that didn't go right. At the end of a battle in the military, and they have their after-action reports and things, everybody's happy to report all the positives, and everyone downplays the negatives. But a good general does not let that happen. A good general makes sure that all the negatives come forward, that he gives out acclamations and kudos for the positive, and then he makes sure that the weaknesses are exposed and rectified so they don't happen again. And it's very difficult to do that in the real world, and it's no less difficult to do that in the game. Especially if a GM's got that sweet spot. It was awesome. It was a great adventure, except Bob didn't have a good time. And the reason Bob didn't have a good time was X, Y, and Z. And the GM was like, oh, crap. It would have made perfect sense if I'd done Y in that scene. So Bob would have had more involvement. It happens. Nobody's perfect. So this, like I said, this is a very broad question, and I'm not sure if I can answer it in a definitive manner. Like I said, there's no formula where you put one thing in, you get something out the other side. It doesn't work that way. This isn't algebra or calculus, both of which I'm very bad at algebra. I never learned calculus, so I guess that's a good example. So again, I'm looking for thoughts in the comments below. How do you try to hit that sweet spot? What is your tricks? How can you coax the information out of the players to give the GM what they need? And how do the players communicate with the GM in a way that doesn't turn them off, doesn't make them think that they've failed, but lets them know that maybe things could have gone a little better? Like I said, it's a juggling act sometimes, and it's difficult. And you want to not hurt anybody's feelings, and you want to not rain on anybody's parade when things went well. But you don't want to leave anybody out in the rain. You don't want to just abandon somebody because they didn't get what they wanted. You don't want any hurt feelings. You don't want any people, picking their gaming books up and storm out of the session because they feel that they were not contributing enough because they were not given the opportunity. A good indication, I think, is that if you see someone trying really hard to come up with a way to shoehorning themselves into a situation that they are not necessarily geared towards. Their character is one type of character, but they keep trying to do something else because the thing that they're geared for is not showing up. And a good player will try to interact. A player will try to contribute. But if they're being frustrated by their lack of ability, that's a sign to the GM that they need to tailor the game a little bit more. Or again, like I said, maybe the character isn't well suited to the campaign. It happens. I've had a character who dedicated a whole lot of time to the languages, and languages just didn't play much role in the game because I didn't really want to have them play a lot of role in the game. It wasn't pertinent to me in the campaign, so that character's resources were not well spent because the player didn't check with me beforehand, and it didn't occur to me that, okay, this guy's just dedicated X percentage of their character development resources to this thing. Why did they do that? I should tell them that this is probably not a great allocation, or give them a discount, so they could then spend some of their resources on something else, not completely dismissing their interest, but letting them know that you may want to spread that around a little more, kind of thing. So, tell me, how can people deal with the dynamics of large mass combats and avoid tedium? And how can people try to aim at that sweet spot and hit it for a diverse group of players? These are tough questions. These are not simple questions Robert's presented us with. So let's put our thinking caps on and see if we can come up with some answers that give Robert a hand.